Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Intro to GitHub Actions for Test Automation with Angie Jones and Brian Douglas. I'm sure you're familiar with our expert speakers, so I will keep this intro very, very brief. A principal developer advocate at Applitools, Angie Jones specializes in test automation strategies and techniques. A pillar of the global test automation community, Angie is a world-renowned speaker and thought leader, and you can often find her presenting and teaching at international software conferences. She's also the driving force and director of Test Automation University, a free online educational platform providing test automation courses by leading instructors. Brian Douglas is a developer advocate at GitHub, where he works on increasing use of the GitHub platform specific features through technical content distributed on the internet. In addition to that, Brian has a passion for open source and loves mentoring new contributors. So without any further ado, Angie and Brian, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Adi. Hello, B. Dougie. What's up?
Hi, thank you very much for having me, and I'm happy to chat with this amazing group here.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining me today. One thing that Adi doesn't know is that you're known as the Beyonce of GitHub. That's quite a compliment.
Well, honestly, it's a compliment I give to myself. I'm not sure how many people outside of myself call me that, but as Adi mentioned, I am a developer advocate at GitHub, and my goal is really just get people to use GitHub in more interesting ways, leverage some of our features like GitHub Actions, and yeah, I go to bat for the Hive too as well, which is our massive amount of users who use GitHub worldwide.
Excellent, excellent. So I'm hearing about GitHub Actions a lot lately. I don't know if that's because I follow you or just in general, but honestly, I don't really get it. Like every description I see is filled with like all of these fancy buzzwords, and it's kind of lost on me. So I'm going to ask you to break this down for us and explain GitHub Actions to me like I'm 5 years old.
Okay, but like you're 5. Excellent.
Like I'm 5.
Yeah, so GitHub Actions is it's a feature you can do on GitHub. So I'll start that. But if you want to automate a piece of something that's happening on GitHub, this is your sort of entry point to leveraging GitHub Actions. Back in the day when I used to watch things like Netflix, I'd have to, well, I didn't have Netflix when I was a kid or when I was 5. I had to turn on the Saturday morning cartoons and basically just watch what was automated in front of me, what was on the schedule. But nowadays, I don't have to set up a Plex server. I can actually just have access to everything at my fingertips on demand and search it. And the beauty of GitHub Actions is that it gives you access to all things that you would have to use by hand and put together, like the API, the webhooks, the authentication, all those pieces of infrastructure to integrate with GitHub. You now get with GitHub Actions by default, just by having a repo on GitHub. So I'm not sure how much of that a 5-year-old would sort of be able to understand, but tried to break it down a bit for at least engineers.
Okay, all right. So, you know, as someone who specializes in automation, then that sounds very useful to me. One of the common phrases I see is build, test, deploy your code right from GitHub. Does that have to do with GitHub Actions? And walk me through this from like a developer standpoint, right? So I've just finished coding some cool new feature. I go to GitHub, and now what happens?
Yeah, so there's a term that was like popularized, which is called GitOps, and that's from another developer ops, a DevOps company, Weaveworks. But I like the term, not that I know much about it, but essentially when you push to GitHub or you push to Git to any platform, stuff should start automating and happening. And with GitHub and having all your stuff in a GitHub repo, there's been a lot of integrations and stuff like that, like CI to integrate with GitHub. And the beauty of that is now it's native. It's a native feature on github.com. So if I want to run my JavaScript test through Jest, and I already have a test command, which is npm test or Jest or whatnot, I can actually add a GitHub action workflow. And GitHub action workflows are combinations of either 1, 2, 3, 20 actions. But if you want to create a workflow of a bunch of actions, that's what you would build to sort of create your testing pipeline, your build pipeline. And then I could sort of have all that happen at the point where I push this to my main branch or I push this to a pull request. I can have automation start to happen at the tip of my Git fingertips.
Very nice, very nice. Okay, all right. So one of the GitHub Actions catchphrases that caught my attention was it enables engineers to get back to what they like to do. Brian, I like that because my day is so bogged down with, like, you know, a bunch of ceremonial tasks when all I really want to do is code. So what exactly is GitHub Actions taking off of my plate?
Yeah, and the beauty of this is it's kind of like a blank slate. You can do all different types of automations thanks to companies like Apple Tools that can provide automation for visual testing. Like, I don't have to build that from scratch. I can integrate that through a GitHub action onto my repo. And one thing that I talk to a lot of, I mentioned I'm the Beyonce of GitHub. I talk to a lot of open source maintainers, open source being this sort of infrastructure, this ecosystem of folks who just do a lot of code and put it out there on GitHub for other people to maintain and benefit from. It's like the beauty of like Netflix already having a platform for me to stream video over the internet. Imagine that like WebRTC having a plugin to include into my application to do WebRTC or to do video conferencing. And getting back to what you like to do, which is essentially write code. A lot of us engineers, we get into engineering as a thing that we just want to get back to just writing code. But as you take on more responsibilities, maybe you're a lead on the team, maybe you have to manage a couple other people as a manager. When I talk to these open source maintainers, all they want to do is just write more code. But what happens is their community gets bigger and bigger. There's more demand on them providing information and leading the product and direction. You can now use GitHub Actions to automate yourself back to, again, writing the code. And I think one of the examples that I shared at GitHub Universe earlier this year, or well, this year is early, late last year in December, GitHub Universe, is we did a hackathon, a GitHub hackathon based on GitHub Actions, githubhackathon.com. And the way we maintained that is we actually automated the submission process. So whenever you submitted a hackathon repo that submitted an action for us to review, we actually had a GitHub action to review the contents of that repo. And if you met the bare minimum requirements of having the right file structure and the right, basically file structure, what we were really just sort of validating that you had a proper action, then you'd just get approved. And then at that point, once you're approved by the action, then we could decide if you should be featured on the homepage or not. Actually, a better example, as you sort of marinate on that, is Hacktoberfest. And Hacktoberfest is something that we, as an open source maintainer, you know there's going to be a lot of people who want to come and contribute to your project. But a lot of times these maintainers, there's one or two folks who want to just ship code. And yes, they want to grow contributors, but not all of them are equipped to be the mentor and shepherd people into it. So I built an action called Take Action, which essentially it just lets people assign themselves to issues. On the GitHub platform and open source, you are limited to a certain amount of interactions that you can do unless you're part of the organization. And I don't want to invite everybody to my organization in open source to take issues or whatnot, but I don't mind them assigning themselves to issues. So I created an action that already has authentication built in. It already has the API of that repo built in. Now anybody can just write the word .take using that command, and they can assign themselves to an issue. And knowing that Hacktoberfest was coming in October, I built this thing, and I was able to shepherd folks and mentor them into shipping contributions to my project without going back and forth and trying to figure out, okay, well, are you working on this? Is this person working on it? All they have to do is just say, I want to work on this. I will take this one. Now it's assigned to me, and then we can move on.
So it automates even, that type of process. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so GitHub Actions, it's more than just testing and building and deploying. It actually automates anything that's a webhook on GitHub. So webhooks being like, I open an issue, I want this automation to start happening, or I open a release. Like a lot of times people will tweet. If open source projects will tweet when they have a release. Imagine if you're an enterprise, every time there's a release or a PR ready to review, you want to assign someone to an issue or assign to them a PR, or you want to notify them in Slack or in Teams. That automation piece of, I open a PR, I want my engineers to review my code. You don't have to manually ping somebody every morning and say, hey, can you review my code? Just let the automation do it. So if no one's reviewed it, have them do have the bots in the automation piece do all the sort of nagging of getting people to review your code.
So I don't have to be the bad guy, right?
No, let the robots be the bad guy.
I love that. I love that. So what are some of the like most common uses of actions that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, hands down, like the best way for people to get their brain around what actions can do is really CI. So running test. Most people, hopefully, I don't want to say most people, but the norm is at least write some test and to make sure that if the thing is out there in production, yeah, if it's out in production, like be confident that this thing's not going to go down or be exposed to security vulnerabilities or whatnot. So bare minimum, if you have a test suite, you can actually have the actions run whenever you push code to the branch, push codes to a release branch or cut a release, or even just open a PR. So those are like, that's probably the most common and probably introduction for folks to get in the actions. I've spent a lot of time doing a lot of automation pieces of just sort of maintaining my projects and also my team. One of the first actions I wrote, well, the first action I wrote was basically, it was called the gift bot. And we're just add a gift to my PRs pretty easily with a slash command. It would actually do a Beyonce GIF, which was the sort of my testing. But the second action I wrote was this: my team were at GitHub were remote, so we were remote before times, and my team actually spanned from Europe to Australia to California. So we didn't have the opportunity to always have meetings together. So what I did is I opened up a GitHub issue. Every morning I automate this on a cron job. So you can do cron jobs with GitHub Actions. And I would just open up an issue once a week on Sunday, because in Australia, Sunday is when my Monday is. Or sorry, vice versa. My Sunday is Australia's Monday. So I would just open up an issue on Sunday, and it would just say, assign everybody to an issue that's on the team and say, what are you working on this week? So instead of us doing a stand-up every day, we have a GitHub issue that opens up once a week, and we can just go to the issue whenever we start our day to see if anybody's blocked, what people are working on, if there's cross collaboration, we can mention each other throughout the week asynchronously. And that's just it's like clockwork. That the issue gets open and it gets closed on Fridays, it gets open on Sundays, and we just sort of move on to getting our work done and getting back to code.
Yeah, that's pretty dope. It sounds like you can use this for anything you can really imagine, right? So
Yeah.
any of your processes or everyday tasks that you're usually doing around your code base or working together collaboratively, you can utilize these actions to help you out. So sounds like CI is the most used, but you can really get creative here, it sounds like.
Yeah, we did in partnership with Dev2, which has now been renamed as Forum. We did a hackathon for GitHub Actions, the second one last year, and we saw quite a few really out-of-the-box ideas. There was somebody who created a IoT device, so whenever someone opens an issue on their project, a red light sirens and basically alerts them that there's an issue open on their PR or in their repo. Not practical, but it was an interesting use case. There was somebody else who every time a PR was merged, they had a IoT device connected to a candy machine. So once the PR was merged, candy would actually dispense. So you get like a Pavlovian feeling every time you get code that makes it to the main branch, which is like, again, these are all sort of interactions and webhooks that existed with our API that now are connected and given to you for free with GitHub Actions. There's no setup, no process of you sort of trying to figure out how this works. And then the beauty of this is that we have the GitHub Marketplace, where if you want to find actions that sort of are doing these sort of things, you just go ahead and search it. And the majority of them are open source, so you can see how the code runs and how it works. If it's not up to your taste or standards, you can actually clone or fork it and create your own action.
Wow. Okay, so I've never even, I barely knew what actions were, but definitely didn't think that you could share actions with others. That's pretty cool. I don't know what that like does is GitHub, but
yeah, that's the beauty of it, is that these actions, the majority of them they're sort of distributed as GitHub repos. So the way you point to it at GitHub Action is you actually point to the GitHub repo that it lives in.
Okay. And so Wait, so the action is inside of like a repo with the code, or it's its own repo?
Choose your own adventure. So I have an action that is, if you go to well, I can show my profile later, but github.com/bdougie, you'll notice that my GitHub profile README looks kind of like MySpace, and that's intentional. I basically built MySpace as my README, and the way I'm working with that is through a GitHub action. So if you want to add yourself to my top 8, you open up an issue, you add your handle to the issue title, and then you provide some descriptions of like why you should be my top 8. And then what happens is once you open that, a GitHub action will trigger and open a PR based on the content you put in the issue. And then once I review it, I can approve the PR, merge it. When I merge it, it closes the issue, and then it adds you to my top 8. So it's all through automation. It's, again, this is not something that you'd probably use in your day-to-day in your enterprise or your team, but it's a fun way to sort of play with the actions environment and try to see what the expansion of it. But to answer your original question, all that code is written directly in my profile README. So if you want to see my Ruby script that I wrote, you can see how the code is run, and then be able to see, okay, well, Brian did it this way. I'm going to clone this or fork it and make it my own.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, I did see your top 8. I was quite offended that Tom from MySpace was there before I made the list. So that's my challenge. I didn't know that I could,
This is why MySpace failed, because it's hard to keep everybody happy who's in your top 8, and also trying to tell like aunties and sisters and uncles why they didn't make the cut.
Right. Right. Okay, so I do have a question from Sia in the audience. She says, thank you for that Like I'm 5 version. She definitely needed that. So you kind of answer her question. It was like, with the automation of reviews and actions, what are some applications that you can integrate with? For example, she asked, can you do this with Slack box to notify people, and you say yes. Are there any like other popular applications? And 2, are there like, is this like in the Slack channel? Is there like a GitHub Actions Slack bot or something? Like, how do you get started with something like that?
Yeah, so that's actually a great question that I could sort of break this down. So before GitHub Actions, we still have this thing called GitHub Apps, and these are folks that are integrating into GitHub's platform and having fine-grained permissions and controls. So if you think of like my former employer, which is Netlify is a continuous delivery platform service, and has a bunch of bells and whistles and tools. They actually have an integration, which is a GitHub app, which is a full, they're handling authentication, they're handling emails and stuff like that. That's intense for if I just want to be on a team and want to add a nice little reminder that your PR is still open. So I would go GitHub Action because it's all native within my team, or I just want to share the code publicly. There's nothing, private, no algorithms that I have to keep secret. So we have 2 different patterns and pathways, and the actions is like the way for everybody to sort of get their hand into automation like really quickly. But the answer to the question about like Slack and other tools, there is a Slack integration built by GitHub employees. If you go to Slack, you can actually install the GitHub app in the Slack, and it will notify you when you do have a PR open. But that's just Slack. So not everybody uses Slack. So we have like Microsoft Teams, we have Telegram, we have Discord. Those are all things that we don't support natively as a GitHub, but that you can yourself through things like GitHub Actions. So all you have to do is, the nice thing about this is that you have secrets that you can actually apply to your organization on the organizational level or the repo level. So if you have a Discord token or a webhook, you can actually create that interaction directly within the GitHub platform to make notifications happen. So one popular use case happened to be Telegram, because a lot of folks were using Telegram for communicating with their teams outside, especially outside the US, because I think there's the per seat license for Slack might be a little pricey for our folks outside the US or getting a San Francisco based salary. So there's options for you, just makes the integrations that way. So, and it really just comes down to just making sure that you apply the secrets or the tokens, whatever the action needs to talk to, and then sort of walk through it that way. And I do recommend, if you do have time, go to githubhackathon.com. There are some Telegram and Discord examples, and the beauty of those is that they're all open source. So if you want to see how they integrated that and what sort of SDKs they leveraged to make that work. You can see it just by clicking through the repo.
Okay, that's pretty neat. I have another question from Mohab. Asks, would it be safe to say that a team can use GitHub Actions instead of something more mature like Jenkins to drive CI/CD? Does it cover everything from cloud server allocation to environment setup, building, deployment, and testing?
So yes, and I guess maturity is subjective at this point, where GitHub Actions, yes, it's only been around since 2018, and it's gone through a couple of different iterations. But I think we have sort of covered a lot of different bases when it comes to resources and needs for different companies. Now, if you are using something in the JVM that's specific to Jenkins that maybe includes an extension that perhaps it doesn't actually cover within the community developed actions or something like that, there's opportunity for you to bring that over because GitHub Actions is so open to be able to integrate with. You could probably start leveraging some other open source tools to make that work. But I will point out that I guess in short, yes, the answer is yes. You could do quite a bit with GitHub Actions. Open source is something that I point to a lot because I spend a lot of time with that community. Open source, a lot of open source projects like Open SDK. I'm blanking on the Project Scala and some other tools and projects like Rust, and they've chosen to use actions for their CI, and they've very complicated setups. And I point this out because these are organizations that might be open source, but they operate kind of at the level of the enterprise grade solutions, and they've made the choice to leverage GitHub Actions, and it's been nice to see them leverage GitHub Actions because they're able to sort of see if there are sort of edge cases and things that they need to enable on our platform. We're able to address their communications and concerns through GitHub issues. It's funny because the amount of times I've gotten mentioned on a random GitHub issue because I happen to be a public face of this feature. It's a lot, and it's quite fun to sort of solve those problems by then mentioning a PM at GitHub, which is something I do a lot, is to sort of defer to someone who knows more about it than I do.
Yeah.
But with that said, like we do have the GitHub community forum, so github.community is the TLD, and that's an opportunity for folks to make requests of features, make requests of things that they don't see working in actions. But I'd be surprised if there were things that you could not do today. But with that being said, it is open source. Like a lot of the stuff that they integrate with the actions, like if it doesn't work for you, you're more than welcome to take that experience and that learning to another platform. I'd be surprised if you wanted to, but like the sort of community and camaraderie through open source is this something that really it's a value add when you sort of make that decision to leverage GitHub Actions because you have insight to so many other projects that way.
Okay. Very, very nice. Very nice. Powerful stuff here. So you mentioned workflows earlier. I know that there's some default workflows to help you get started quicker, but can you explain like what a workflow is exactly and what types are available?
Yeah, so these workflow files, so a lot of people might not be aware if you haven't used Actions or use other they're not hidden GitHub features, but there are features that are they're placed in the .github folder. So you have access to a couple cool things inside the .github folder, like adding code owners. If there are folks who own a specifically folder or a section of the code, you could put what handles our GitHub users own that code. So in the .github folder, there's a workflows folder. And this is where all your GitHub action workflows live. And with workflows, think of these like kind of like pipelines or sort of like end-to-end automation or interactions with GitHub repos and API and webhooks all together. Within the workflows, you could choose how you want to trigger the actions. So a common use case is CI, where you do want to trigger on push and pull requests. You can do either one or both or more, and you want to run the test on those. So you have those workflows that run on that. Then you can set up in the workflow, you can set up environments. So if you want to run this on Ubuntu, if you want to run this on Mac OS, if you want to run this on Windows, like you have that opportunity to do that. Choose your best use case for whatever you're trying to accomplish. I've used Mac OS workflows because I needed Homebrew to be able to install certain extensions and features to make my Rails app work.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also Android and iOS, like you would probably want to have one or the other or both when testing. And then you have the ability to run versions of different within the actual environments. Then you can run, you could actually run jobs is what I'm trying to say. And within the workflows, you can run up to 22 jobs asynchronously. So if you want to run test and the visual test asynchronous to each other, but just run those, like you can do that as well. If you want to prep, maybe you're doing visual testing, but you want to deploy a staging deployment first, you can also do synchronous jobs too as well, which we call those steps. So if you want to make sure that deploys to AWS or some staging server before the visual test runs on that staging server, you will have a synchronous step that falls one after the other. So it's hard to explain this with just saying it, but yeah, those are what workflows. You have an opportunity to sort of build your recipes per se. I mentioned the word pipeline, but for explaining like your recipes of how you want to sort of integrate and automate certain pieces of your code base.
Okay, and these are customizable, I assume?
Yes, they're customizable, and the beauty of this is like back when I first started using GitHub Actions, like I don't have a lot of projects that are super massive that really need a lot of infrastructure or pipeline and stuff like that. But I did have a project that I was working on internally that needed Postgres. It was a Rails project. It needed a specific pathway to testing, and I didn't actually know how to get it done because it's something that kind of works by default whenever I run it locally. I don't use Docker or anything like that. I was able to leverage someone else's workflow that was open source and public. Someone wrote a blog post on how to get Rails running with Postgres in GitHub Actions. So I was able to copy and paste their entire workflow into my folder, and it just worked. So being able to share, like imagine you run the JVM or you run specific like Android test suites and interactions. You don't have to kind of figure it out yourself. You can just go to someone who you know in the open source world or someone who shared their workflows and copy and paste their YAML. So each workflow file is a YAML file. Copy and paste that YAML and put it into your code, see if it works. And if it works, then you have a legitimate way to do automation within your repository.
Very nice. Okay, I have another question from Valro asked, do GitHub Actions bring parallelization out of the box, like running several workflows or like different test suites in parallel?
Yeah, so these workflows, yeah. So you can run them in parallel. As I mentioned, you have 22 jobs that can run asynchronously. We do have size and limit and constraints too as well. So definitely read the back of the box to see if you need to pay more money to get access. Like there is a level of access, like 2,000 minutes for every public open source repo is what we hand you for free. But then by paying, you get access to more. But as well as parallelizing, yeah, you definitely get more access for paying. And then if you like need some sort of intense infrastructure, you obviously want to pick up the phone, call sales, and see if they can basically meet your needs.
Okay. All right. Very nice. Very nice. All right. Let's see. So as an automation engineer, and you can see why this is intriguing to me, and I understand a bit about how I can use this for test automation. Mainly what I'm leaning towards is I can use it for the CI/CD. Is that about right, or am I missing anything here?
Yeah, you could use it for the CI/CD. You could do it for quite a few other things. Like if you have like I keep pointing to like mobile examples because those are the ones that I find really interesting on trying kind of hard problems to test. But it also because I don't work on that full time. But like things like having test flight, being able to run in flight, running tests and things like that. This another thing that I just recently did, and I talked about at GitHub Universe as well, which is having a lighthouse score at the time of PR. It's something that you could do. You could run the Lighthouse CLI, and Lighthouse is, if you aren't familiar in the web development space, being able to get performance, accessibility, network speeds, and stuff like that on your live running site to see if there's areas for improvement. I like the idea because I take a lot of contributions outside. I like the idea at the time when I get a PR open that I get a Lighthouse score. And that's told to me at that time in that instance. So that way, if someone introduces a new library that makes my entire app slower, or if they introduce a new way to do images that's not accessible, I get a big red flag and a failure on my test suite, specifically for the Lighthouse score going down. And it's a tool. It's a action that I've used by someone who I've never met. I just happen to know him in the open source world, named Jake Jarvis. He has this Lighthouse action that at the time of PR, it looks at my Netlify deploy preview and then runs the Lighthouse score on that. So what's wild about this and crazy is that, like, I'm able to really keep an eye on what's happening in my application while taking third-party contributions, but then also really, like, where accessibility and sometimes could always be an afterthought, or sometimes be an afterthought. I said always and sometimes in the same sentence. I meant sometimes can be an afterthought. I can now keep that top of mind, because I know if I, with Lighthouse, you can do like a budget.json. If I know if it goes below the budget that I can allow for, size and constraints, then I can just basically say, okay, I'm not merging this in to basically ruin accessibility or performance. We're going to actually solve this problem at this time of the PR rather than push it off down the road.
Okay, so you opened up a can of worms when you brought up the mobile. I'm getting a couple of questions around that. So someone is asking, can GitHub Actions allow using a full Windows OS with a native Windows app installed and include like Appium and WinApp driver?
Yeah. So I hypothetically, yes, I haven't done it myself, so I will give it that caveat. But I do know when we were first publishing, so GitHub has a GitHub mobile app. And one of the first things I saw, one of the biggest mobile instances was actually the mobile team at GitHub getting all tests and everything running in the environment through a GitHub action in time for our announcement at GitHub Universe the year prior. So yeah, it is possible. It also will point to the fact that perhaps you're an enterprise user or you just want to have more power and more access. We do have the ability to self-host your action runners. So we did this thing when Actions was released back in 2018. So I'm trying to get my years right. It was actually 2019, so it was a year after Actions was launched. We made the announcement that we're going to be open sourcing our entire action runners. So if you want to take the exact same infrastructure that runs Actions in the cloud on github.com and run that on maybe your AWS or your Azure servers or whatever your cloud provider of choice, maybe it's your server in your kitchen or not, you can actually take the GitHub Actions runners and run them locally. So if you want to add access to different, for Appium and other tools, you can do that. I would also mention too as well, like there's probably an extension for Appium as well. I'm sorry, when I say extension, there's probably GitHub Action to include Appium as a plugin. In the world of GitHub Actions workflows, we call them services. So you'd actually include those services in your workflow as well. So again, I haven't used Appium myself to be able to say yes or no, but it's a quick Google if you want to go to GitHub Marketplace or search it in the GitHub community forums if to keep me honest, sir, in case I am speaking out of turn on that one.
Okay, very nice, very nice. Okay, there are a few more questions, but there are people who are badgering me to see this demo. So I'm going to let you take over, do the demo. For those whose questions I haven't answered yet, hopefully we'll have some time to answer your questions, but I do want to let people see the demo, and then we'll try to answer your questions. If not, we'll get Brian to answer them in like a blog post or something like that. All right. So Brian, let me give you control of the screen. Oh, so many people on. Let me find you. Okay, here you are.
Excellent. Right. Exciting.
All right, so take it away.
All right. I am now showing the right screen, and y'all can now see my website. This is my website called Debugging Live. This is sort of where I put all my things I'm working on. It's a Next.js application, if y'all are familiar with the React ecosystem, hosted on Vercel. Nice tools. They give me really generous free accounts. And I actually have this site powered by a GitHub repo. So Debugging Live, Debugging is my handle, by the way, and Live is the repo. And in this, I enjoyed this a lot because I'm looking forward to actually writing some more tests with this. But one thing I just want to point out is that I have access to GitHub API. So what I do is everything I want to work on, I keep in like a little blog post. You can actually log in and do little reactions if you wanted to. And the way this works is I have my GitHub issues. So I overuse the GitHub API, but my GitHub issues are actually in my blog post. So this is how this works. I just want to sort of give a nice little example. So you can see the all the comments here are the same comments that should be here. Actually, I think I need to log in for those to show. Oh, actually, I wonder why the comments are not showing. But we won't debug that because I don't have a test for that. So apologies there. What I did want to show is that I do have a GitHub action here, and I have a GitHub action which is called it should be called push to main. So every time I push to the main branch, what I want to do, and actually, folks, perhaps this is not zoomed in enough. Let me zoom this a little more. This is what I was talking about with the GitHub workflows. So in my repo, I have a .github folder, and in there I have a workflows folder. At the moment, I just have one workflow file because I built this app with no test and sort of on a weekend on a whim. So apologies for the no test. I know that's not kosher. And I was speaking of how you should have tests, but in here I have a GitHub workflow called Do It Live, which is tongue-in-cheek, Debugging Live. I have this running on a webhook, which is push, and I have a choice if I wanted to actually run this on a few different other options. Like if I want to do like a manual push, I could do that. That's a invalid name. Actually, it's workflow dispatch. That's why. Sorry, I have a lot of domain-specific knowledge of what things used to be called. But yeah, I could run this on pull request, which, wow, I am failing on all. It should be pull request - pull request. But anyway, we'll back out of that. I don't know why I'm spelling that wrong. But anyway, there's going to be a bunch of different workflows, and I'll show you that in the documentation in a moment. But for the time being, I'm going to be running this on push. And then, as I mentioned, you can have different environments. So on line 5, you can see I'm running this on Ubuntu. I did not do any sort of steps to set this up to run on Cypress. I do have a visual test that's actually, it's not a visual test. It's an integration test to check my title that I wrote a Cypress test for. And I'm actually using an action that I'm just benefiting directly from Cypress. Cypress, the actual company, wrote in a GitHub action that lives here that is simply a GitHub repo. And as I mentioned before, if you wanted to, you could have went to GitHub Marketplace to find this. But because I already have this installed, you can see all these other applications and tools that you can have access to as GitHub Actions. And as I mentioned before, GitHub Apps is another construct that you'll want to remember that name to as well when you do searching. But going back to my action, I've got two things happening. I'm running my Cypress test using this repo. I'm actually doing on the release version 2, specifically for that version. I could append master or main or a GitHub SHA here if I wanted to have specifically that commit. And then I had mentioned with the jobs 22, I have a job called Cypress Run, and then I have a job called Audit. And these jobs are actually going to run independent of each other. So just keep that in mind, that these will not run synchronous, they'll run at the same time. So I'll probably see my audit finish before. But before I jump into there, I just want to point out that I have another action that I'm running, which is called checkout. What this really does is it actually just checks out the branch. So a lot of times when you have a PR, you want to check out the main branch to see if this code will work on the main branch. So that's what that does. It's a very simple action built by the Actions team at GitHub. And then I have another action which I'm using, and this is all within the same workflow. I've got 1, 2, 3 actions. I'm using checkout twice, 2 different versions by mind you too as well. I'm now also checking the Lighthouse score of my BW Live site. So when I do push to the main branch, I do want to be able to get a Lighthouse score. I do want to have the Lighthouse score saved as an artifact on the repo. So every time I push in that instant, in that version, I will have a Lighthouse score saved for that version at that time. And then I do have temporary storage. So this will actually delete after 30 days as well. So yeah, we don't want to be taking up all our space and GitHub calling us on the phone one day and saying we owe money. So I'm going to make a pretty arbitrary change, which I probably should have planned on what change I'm gonna make. But for the sake of making something super simple, I know this is going to trigger on anything random, so I'm just going to create a comment that's just going to say anything random, because I know that this is going to trigger a change on my main branch too as well. And I'll be sure to revert that commit in a second. But because this is running on push, it means anything that happens to git push. I did not use the CLI to do this, but historically you probably you shouldn't be making changes directly in GitHub with no checks and balances. But I just wanted to show that in the Actions tab, I can now see that I updated that file, which is error box. Oop, I wonder why I have a failing test. But I did mention that I do have two asynchronous jobs that are now running. So now I have inside the same workflow, which is push to main, I do have Cypress run, and then I do have the audit that's going to run. And I think the audit's going to finish first. Yeah, and then I'm now looking at my logs. Looks like the audit's actually done. Looks like Cypress is going to take a little time because it's going to need to set up an environment to be able to run my test. But I do want to point out that now I have inside my action workflow, which let me get back to do it live. I should have an artifact that should be uploaded. I might have to wait until this Cypress is done real quick. But yeah,
Okay,
let's
is it done?
Go ahead.
Yeah,
no,
so
it's going to take a little time.
A quick question. So Christine asked if we can write workflows using our language of choice, for example, JavaScript or TypeScript. I'm thinking like you write the action itself in a YAML file and it could point to any script. Is that right or what?
Yeah, and I can show you that real quick. Yeah, it looks like my summary is done. I now have 2 green check marks, which makes me very happy. Also, I only have 1 test, so I was imagining that would actually stay green because I made a very arbitrary change. But I did want to point out that my Lighthouse results are now accessible. I can open those in a folder, and well, it happened off screen, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
But we could also see that my Lighthouse score is absolutely horrible. So I'll fix that later. But now every time I push to a commit, I have an artifact that's actually attached to that action log. But moving on to the question for any language of choice, I did in that case, I use third-party actions. I can go and look at Cypress's actions, but I do have a better action that I wanted to share, which is my MySpace page. So this is basically the GitHub profile README is a space that you could just put any sort of arbitrary information to promote yourself, maybe your resume, maybe your top 10 projects, maybe some blog posts. I made the decision to pick the top 8 people I happened to be chatting with at the time back in June. So these are all folks I've interacted with, and I put them in a top 8, and I'll show you exactly what that looks like in the case of the GitHub action. So I'd mentioned every time I add someone to the project, I have an action that basically populates them in this YAML right here. So these are all the same people we saw earlier. I do have a top 8, so Mish Manners is actually not showing because it is a top 8 and she's number 9. But this is where my action is powered. And I'll show you the code first, which looks like this. It's a little bit of Ruby. And if you're familiar with Ruby or Python, this is they both kind of look very similar. But you can see that I'm just running a bunch of scripts using OctaKit, which is a SDK for GitHub. Definitely check it out. I don't think we have time to really go deep in there. But I'm basically creating a file, adding stuff to my developers.yaml, and then updating my preview to build a new profile README. And that's all code that, here's the update README right here. All code that sort of this happens. And if you remember, all my workflows live inside the workflows folder. You can see the readme.yaml lives right here. And you can see same sort of setup. The only difference is the last workflow I showed you was on push. This one's actually on issues. So every time an issue is opened, which is, as I mentioned briefly, is if you want to add yourself to my top 8, you open up issue, you add your name to the issue, and then it opens up PR, and then I can merge the PR and approve it, and then it closes the issue. So whenever the issue is opened or edited.
Like issue or push, or is that like in the documentation? How do we know the available ones?
Yeah, so there's 2 things, and perhaps it's because I was zoomed in too much that I wasn't seeing my autocomplete happening, but it is in the documentation. So we have events that trigger workflows.
Okay.
So if I went down to issues, I can now see all the types that are available to me. So I do have open and edited, but transferred issues, which you can take an issue, transfer it to another repo. Imagine you transfer it to a different repo. You want somebody to be notified someone did that. That's something you could set up very easily through Telegram integration or maybe a Twitter DM if you really wanted to get fancy. But yeah, there's quite a few things you can do with that. But not just issues. Like labeling is something that I do a lot. I want to be able to, for GitHubHackathon.com, the way I was merging PRs is actually labeling them. It is because it's faster to label than to type out the full thing, approved, denied, declined, or whatever. I would just apply a label, approved, and then it would merge the PR and then do some other stuff on the website based on that automation pipeline I built. Pull request reviews, pull request target changing. That's like if you didn't want to go to the release branch, you wanted to go to the main branch. A lot of different things you can do based on interactions with the repo. 2 things that are actually 3 things that are sort of outside the box of GitHub workflows is workflow dispatch, which is I started typing manual. This is if you want to trigger through a button, if you want an action to be triggered. So like perhaps you don't want this to fire every hour or once a day or once a week, but you just want to fire, when someone remembers to do it. That's what workflow dispatch means. Repository dispatch, if you want to trigger a GitHub action based on something outside of GitHub. So imagine you have another website or something else or a database that you want to, when the database populates, you want to trigger the GitHub actions to go read new data or scrape new data for whatever reason. And then scheduled events are as cron jobs.
Very nice. Someone's asking, how do you debug an action while it's running? Can you connect to like a VM or container where it's running? Can you extract logs or print screens or anything like this?
Yeah, so all of the above. Yeah, so there are a couple different options, and I just want to shout out real quick. I have a video that I haven't actually published. This is my YouTube channel. I've been doing an action traction series, so folks, my Twitter is out there. If you have ideas, I've been just storing ideas and recording these on the weekends. I actually have a video of how I debug actions. I haven't shipped it yet because some things have changed and how you can approach debugging, but I can talk through that. And I think primarily one thing you could do is you could actually create a workflow dispatch event. So if you want to be able just to run the action on demand, this is the one I would use, that event to replace. And to be very clear, where is my workflow? So replacing issues with workflow dispatch. Or you can actually just add it here as well, which I can showcase what that looks like too as well. Yeah, so I'm just going to add it manually here so you can see what I'm talking about. But this is something that's sort of saved my bacon quite a few times just to be able to test it manually. Now, for interacting with the actions environment, real quick, I'm just going to go to, I think the UI is a little different when it's zoomed in too much. But being able to run the workflow dispatch, it gives you this button. So now I can manually run this action on demand on whatever branch I choose as well. So just keep that in mind. There are some teammate actions. This one, I actually use this one a lot to be able to actually see the environment, the action runner. Because it's hosted in GitHub's cloud, I want to have access to be able to see different environment variables. You can actually leverage this action and get access to a teammate URL, which is right here. And then you basically have access to the shell directly. The other option is if you want to do a self-hosted runner, with self-hosted GitHub Actions is what it sounds like. if you wanted to run the GitHub Action Runner locally on your machine or on Azure or on AWS or whatever, you could actually just point the GitHub Action instead of, oh, actually, yeah, I'm in the wrong one. I'm looking at the wrong repo. But in the settings, you can actually point this to, instead of the cloud-hosted actions, you can actually point it to self-hosted, which gives you way more access to be able to, here we go, add runner. So you would point this to your whatever URL you have, whether it's localhost or some sort of pipeline into the action runner that you're running. And then you'd be able to sort of debug and figure out what's going on. And then, sorry, it's a long answer because there's no premier way today to run actions. And maybe this is sort of the person who asked about Jenkins. This is probably one of the edge cases of like, we don't have an elegant way to debug actions. So this might be something that you want to basically consider too as well. And there's one other project which is also lets you access to the action runner shell too as well to run them on demand, which is called Act. Also open source and built by a community member.
Very nice, very nice. You answered someone else's question with that. So you did 2 for 1 there. Someone was asking about, you know, if they weren't using the cloud, could they still use Actions? So that's great.
Yeah, you could definitely run it on a Mac Mini or a Linux box or something in your closet or whatever, or whichever.
Okay, very nice, very nice. All right, let's see. Are you ready for more questions, or did you want to show something else?
Oh no, actually, I'm enjoying the questions.
Okay. All right, let's see. Will Johnson is here. He says he just wanted to tell you he loved your GitHub README.
Excellent. Thank you,
Will. Okay, let's see which ones haven't we answered yet. I think you answered most of these in your demo. Yeah, I think we might have got through them.
Yeah. Well, we have
a question, ask it right now or forever hold your peace. Someone saying mainly for reading environment variables, like, I don't know, this doesn't seem like a question. Reading or setting property files. Someone is asking about reporting. What reporting options are there?
So at the moment, it's very limited to be able to understand like how many minutes you're using or how many interactions are basically triggering actions on your organization. That is something we're actively working on. We don't have a release date for that feature yet, but it will be in this tab here called Insights. So that's coming down the pipe. If you have ideas of things you would like to see because you already have infrastructure that you're maintaining and would like insight on, I do highly recommend if you have a contact at GitHub, maybe your enterprise customer, definitely talk to them. If not, leverage the GitHub community forum to be able to provide your insight. This is something that is actively being reviewed by PMs and engineers. So any questions around GitHub Actions and API and apps will be in the GitHub ecosystem tab. So feel free to ask your question there and search there as well. I did want to also, reporting is very light at the moment and another place that we definitely want to improve on. But I will also mention that we have a little workshop that I have, which I think that, there we go. If you went to GitHub Craftwork, so github.com/GitHub Craftwork/start here, this is a little tutorial of how GitHub Actions work. So I have a GitHub action that essentially invites you to the organization. This is something that as a person who does workshops, it's kind of pretty hard to try to collect emails and then invite everybody to the GitHub org, so then you have access to the repos if it's a private org. So I just created a GitHub action that basically you just type .invite me and you're able to invite yourself to the org, and then you basically go through the next parts of the workshop as a README, so it's all in the repo. So if you want to go on this excursion, it probably takes less than an hour to get through. You actually learn a little bit about GitHub Actions. I have a GitHub action that triggers on issues that creates a Mad Lib as well. So think of outside the box of how to leverage GitHub Actions. I have a GitHub action that this is my repo here called variables and markdown. You can actually see the code. It's Ruby code. It's hosted as a Ruby gem. So you can sort of see the how to experience actions outside of CI. And then of course we have a CI. The CI is actually built with Node. So just keep that in mind that if you're not using Node, it could be very useful or not useful. But if you're using something like Java, we do have a GitHub action on our GitHub lab.github.com course, which is our learning lab. We have some intros to GitHub Actions and GitHub Actions with CI as well.
So I have a couple of questions that are asking about like what's the best place to go if they want to learn some more. Would you recommend this link?
Yeah, well, this link is going to give you a little more. It's going to go further than what I showed you before. Okay. So the craft work is really just an intro, so to get your feet wet and experience it and ask questions. This is going to go further into like actually using services and integrating with AWS and stuff like that.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we're going to collect all of the links because Brian has given us quite a few links today. So we'll collect those when we put out the video recording. So I see your questions about will it be recorded. It is recorded. We'll send that out by end of day Monday. We'll also include the links that Brian has shared with us today because this is some really good stuff. All right, one final question, Brian. Someone asked, what does the roadmap look like for GitHub Actions?
That is a good question. And we have a public roadmap. It is a repo. I can't show you the internal one, but I can show you the external one. So it is a GitHub repo. And if you go to the project board, you can actually see the public roadmap here. And it's just as easy as looking for the word action. So we have a couple different things. Looks like this is the column we're in. Actions for GitHub Enterprise. We're basically expanding the access to that, integrations with packages. Yeah, so this is the place to look at, github.com/github/roadmap. We love open source, so we've open sourced our roadmap here. Well, everything that's sort of set in stone. The internal one is sort of where we complain and go back and forth and try to organize that in Sprint. But yeah, we have quite a few things here. I don't quite remember where inside the metrics analytics will fall, which was that other insights question. But I think it'd probably be closer to the summer. Let's see. Oh, nope. Yeah, I don't digest the roadmap every day, so I'm not really sure what's still here and what's been moved and completed. But action templates, actually. Manage workflow templates. So we are focusing a lot on organizational level actions. So being able to organize and say, I'm running a team or I'm a CTO or VP of engineering at this company. I want to be consistent across all repos, have these 3 actions. This is that's what that is. Being able to have a template for every repo that opens up in your project, have these actions running on them.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. All right, thank you, Brian. That was very helpful. You've given us a lot to digest here, and looks like there's much more to learn, and we can go pretty deep with actions. I'm going to turn it back over to Adi to give us our housekeeping rules and close it on out.
Excellent. Thank you, Angie.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's see.
Great. So Angie, I turned it over to you in terms of the screen, so you can put your information and Brian's information up there for everyone to see, print the screen or whatever. So unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. And before I let Angie and Brian say their goodbyes, I want to thank everyone that joined us for this live session, and of course, thank Angie and Brian for this hands-on webinar. As Angie mentioned before, the recording will be emailed to you by end of day Monday, including all the links that Brian will share with us. So that will wait for you in your inbox by end of day Monday. And I do hope to see you at our next event. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Brian, for joining us. This was very insightful. Thank you, everyone who took time out of your busy day. I know that you had many things to do. So taking this hour out to learn more about GitHub Actions. Hopefully, this was beneficial for you.
Yeah, it was I love the questions. Folks, my information is on the screen. If you have more questions, I am happy to sort of field them. I think y'all definitely really have me wanting to build more examples and answer more questions in future. So would love to come back and love to chat with you in the future.
All right.